Hello, hello, Edson Oliveira here. This is the January 2019 edition of the TADUG Meetup. Today is, and I don't have my, yes, I have it here, January the 9th. It's a Wednesday and it's 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a great guest as usual. And I just want to start by thanking Chris Hammond to show up, and it was a last minute invitation. So again, Chris, thank you very much for doing this. Just so you know, I think that you are muted, Chris, but again,
Yeah.
no problem.
I was going to let you talk.
Okay, so let's get things rolling here. The agenda, as usual, there's nothing new here. We're gonna go through some acknowledgements, some announcements, a little bit of group time, so we can go around and talk a little bit. Presentation: installing DNN on Windows Azure is too hard. You shouldn't do it. As I mentioned to Chris before, it's a very title baiting type of title, but hey, that's a great one.
It is.
And then we have our wrap up. Great. So just a few acknowledgements. We have our sponsors, DNN for Less, in terms of hosting with our friend there, Jesse Heidi. Andrew Hofflin from Hofflin Software. Andrew has helped us put together the website, and he will be actually presenting next month, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And we also have EasyDNN Solutions. They have provided a few modules for our website to help out with our website. So thank you very much to our sponsors. Okay, so announcements, I'll keep them brief, but I have some more in a second. It seems that for the past 3 months, I have been saying DNN 3 9.3 is coming up. It's coming up, and there's a new date for the release candidate. It's set as January 14th, and the final release being February 4th. Again, this is what is established there in the roadmap. I'm not sure if it will come to fruition like that, or if dates will be adjusted again. But there are some major updates being done behind the scenes, like updating the version of what is the name of the React? Exactly. Updating the version of React, amongst other things. So this is about that one. Group time. Let's talk a little bit about us a little bit here. So I just want to give a shout out for Mr. Mike Smeltzer. Mike Smeltzer from Halifax. He is a new dad. And Sophie Elizabeth June Smeltzer, she was born just around Christmas time. So Mike, you should be busy right now. That I'm gonna assume that this is the reason why you are not around today. I tend to think that you are, busy with diapers and things like that. So again, congratulations, Mike. That's awesome news.
Congrats, Mike.
Congrats.
Paul, let me put you on the spot there, Paul. Again, it is out of curiosity, and I've seen in the last few weeks, months, maybe, GM closing down in Oshawa.
Yeah. Yes, they are.
What can you tell us?
Just that.
Just
The
that?
assembly facility is closing. At one point, it was General Motors' largest facility in North America. Give you an idea how big the place is. It's 22 acres under roof. And it was 2 assembly plants, a truck plant, a battery plant, major stamping facility, major parts warehouse. And over the years, it has slowly contracted. And it's basically musical chairs. We're making right now in the assembly facility at GM, they make cars primarily. They made a small change over the last little while to be able to build trucks. But that was a short-term contract just to produce trucks for until actually October of this coming year, or this year now, and now it's 2019. So the end result is that we have no product allocation beyond December of 2019. So the facility is closing, along with Lordstown, Ohio, and Detroit Hamtramck. Those two other assembly facilities, along with Baltimore Transmission and one other one. I can't remember the name of the facility. And there are two facilities in South America that are closing. So General Motors is had overcapacity for many years. So they're now contracting it down. And to be honest, the facility in Oshawa is a shadow of itself now. So it's at its low ebb and probably will have the least impact of closing now than if it was to close, many years ago when it was had a lot more employees. So
actually, a friend of mine was mentioning that it used to be that they had 20,000 employees there in that facility before.
The top end in just around 2000, around 1980, 85 timeframe, somewhere in there. Topped out at 26,000 employees. Wow. But that's at that point in time, everything was built and assembled in house. They assembled the steering wheels, they painted the steering wheel shaft, they would assemble the seats, and they would do all of that sort of things. And slowly that got disseminated to many of the different subcontractors. And really the only thing that's being done in-house now is just the assembly of the major components.
Got it.
And so that's... so unfortunately, it's a 7-to-1 ratio primarily. There's 2,500 employees, union employees, about 3,000 salary staff involved, and they will, for each one of those, there's about 7 other people employed in the 6 to 7 people employed in servicing that environment from other sub-assemblies through services like drivers, truck drivers, rail services coming in and out with parts and that. So it's going to be a blow to the economy, but frankly, the area where we live has been slowly getting ready for this. I mean, this is, if you've been paying attention in the Oshawa area and know anything about what's been going on, this has been telegraphed for the last 5 years. So it's no real shock. It's unfortunate, but it's not, nobody, if somebody's saying they were shocked, then they weren't paying attention. All right. And, but there's, the nice thing is the Durham region, the local community government area around here, has identified 5,000 other jobs that are employed, jobs that are available in an area. They may not be the same quality of pay per se, but there are 5,000 job openings in the Durham region that need to be filled in the next little while. And so should be a relatively soft landing for the most of the people around. Also, like myself, most of the people there's a portion of the people will be retiring. So of the 2,500 who are employed right now, I would say probably about 600 or 700 of them will just retire from the workforce.
I've read that again, this might be just fake news or whatever, but I've heard that Elon Musk, Tesla, that they are considering, purchase.
Oh no, it's not. He is looking at any of the assembly plants and possibility as a way to, he said in one of the, I think, interview somewhere that he would be looking at the facilities that would be shuttered by General Motors to potentially to see if there was any capability. Because the plant that he has in Southern California, I think, was a GM facility or a shared GM facility with Suzuki, where they were building, and it was shuttered when the agreement went, when the two companies went their separate ways. And he picked up the facility, and that's where he's building his cars. So he's potentially, the same idea was, would he look at them? And he said, well, of course he's going to look, but the answer is there's nothing here to look at. I don't think he's going to move to, I don't think he wants to go to Detroit Hamtramck and sit there and right in the middle of Motown, sit there and try to build his electric cars.
Probably getting
or
lynched.
be in the middle of Lordstown, Ohio, which is the middle of, I shouldn't say the middle of nowhere, but it is remote. I mean, it's a sort of in it's relatively close to Cleveland, but not that close. So, so I don't know if those two facilities or Oshawa, but no, there's nothing going to happen there. We've basically been guessing that they're going to turn it into the largest grow-op in Ontario.
Okay.
Right. I mean, considering how many acres are under roof, and the facility here at Oshawa is actually completely wired into the Ontario power grid. I mean, their high tension lines come right into the facility itself. You don't, it's not a substation down the block somewhere. It's actually right into the facility. So for all your grow lamps and things like that, it would be no problem for power.
So
grow house. That's what you said.
Oh, grow up. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
Took me a while to figure out what it was.
Well, I don't know. Well, you're in Colorado, or sorry,
no, I'm in the tobacco state of Missouri.
Oh, okay. Sorry, wrong one. I was thinking that you were in one of the legalized states.
I was
right?
at one point. Yeah.
Yes, you were at one point. Yeah, but Ontario is now legalized, so and they're having trouble with keeping up the volume. So I wouldn't be surprised that after a while, because there are several facilities around here, old plants that they've used as grow-ups in Southern Ontario. So could well see the same thing happen. But that's just the joke.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Oh, just this. There is one side effect. I technically work for General Motors IT division, and I am managed out of Austin, Texas. So the plant closure does not affect me directly. I'm not a plant employee. So just to let you know, but I'm planning on retiring here in the next year or so. So I don't know there is some other things going on with GM. So who knows? We will know here in the next month or so what my situation is.
Paul, you will never retire. You keep saying that 1 or 2 years since I've known you. So again, you will not be retired.
No. 10 years ago, I knew I had at least 10 years left. So.
Okay. On a more, let's put it this way. On a more positive note, Amazon in downtown Toronto, they opened a new office with nothing more, nothing less than 600 IT jobs. And I'm not talking about IT counting beans job or stocking jobs. No, I'm talking about data analysts. I'm talking about AI. I'm talking about heavy duty development. So 600 new jobs in downtown Toronto. Again, very good news.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so Paul, let's bring this a little bit closer home here. I want just to ask you about your modules, your DNN modules. I saw that you have been updating them to run on 9.2.
Yes, I've been contacted by several people who have used my modules before, and the various ones I've had, and I've been recompiling them and make sure they work on 9.2. Obviously, with the deprecated or actually removed routines that were taken out in version 9.2. Some of my modules are quite old in the sense that they haven't been recompiled in a few years. We're taking advantage of some of those routines that were deprecated, and now that they're gone, it just doesn't run. So I've recompiled them and got them going, and for the few people that have asked for it, they seem to work just fine. There's no breaking changes per se, other than the fact that the libraries had to be, once I make the change for to use the new revised library routines, works fine. So right now I've done 2 or 3. The big one, obviously, the SGSV, which is the SQL Grid Selected View, which is the one I get a lot of requests for. And the one I did recently was the XML module, which I have a version of it that is hooked up with a SQL query. So there's that module is available also for those who are interested.
Yeah, and if people are interested, Paul, I mean, is that the website? Is that your email?
Yeah, the best thing to do is get hold of me at admin@trestleworks.com or paul@trestleworks.com. It'll get hold of me. It'll direct it to me, and also the trestleworks.com website.
I'll make sure that this is all referenced in the video.
Thank
notes.
You. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so let me carry on here.
Actually, Anderson, just one thing.
Sure.
I'd like to thank you because 2 or 3 people have contacted me because they've watched this broadcast and you've mentioned my name. And because of that, it's feedback. So they're watching it on a replay or something like that. So not necessarily live, but on a replay. So
it's good to know that the 1 or 2 people that watch this afterwards that they benefit, you know.
Just letting you know that there is life, life after being alive.
Awesome. Okay. So of interest here, I just want to mention. Don't want to take up too much time anymore, but I want to mention 2 things. One is a great blog post, and I'm gonna try to bring this. Let me see if I'm able to drag this over. Well, at some point it will show up. Well, this laptop should be fast, you know. I bought it with the promise that it. Okay, so here we have. Yes, this is it's a nice blog post here amongst many, but I want to bring your attention to the platform year in review. If you want to get to know more of what went on last year about DNN, the new initiatives, and actually the progress with the code base as well, you may want to check out this blog post from Mitchell Sellers. He really goes deep into what happened last year, the initiatives that got started, the initiatives that are being carried over. So I think this might be of interest of anyone there in the DNN space. And the next thing, let me see. Yeah, the next thing I want to mention is this month, the DNN Corp Virtual User Conference of Q1 2019. This will be on January 24th on a Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's usually that time of the quarter where Andy Treba, he comes, with a presentation about what has happened in the past quarter and what are the plans for the next one. He brings in members of the community like Major Sellers. He brings in people like people from DNN Corp itself, Clint Patterson, he is usually there as well, and some other team members to give updates and tell us the state of things, So user conference, you may want to check that out. Usually it's 30 minutes to an hour long, and there's usually something worth noting from it. Okay, let me keep going here. Before I go to new members, I just want to give a shout out here to the members that are here live online. Chris, of course, is the presenter. Thank you for being here, Chris. Gary from Toronto. Gary, thank you very much. John Black, my friend John Black from Long Dates. Thank you for being here. Mark Harrell. Thank you, Mark, for showing up. Paul Scarlett, of course. Good to have you, Paul, as well, as usual. And Steve Karpik, again, local peeps. New members? Well, a new member is our friend here, Chris Hammond. He is now a new member as well. But another new member is my good friend, Tracy Whitkeller. Tracy is, he lives in Florida, and he is a book author around the DNN space. He did a lot of designing and skinning. That was really his forte. He has a lot of good training right now. I think it's on Training Academy, DNNTrainingAcademy.com, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for joining us, Tracy, as well. Okay, So let's get to the main presentation. I just want to mention first of all, you know, that I remember. I don't know if you both remember, and I think that you guys remember. I remember a few years ago, in the first incarnation of TADUG, that Chris Hammond was here face to face in person. Actually, he was here in my city. Chris, you were just about 2 kilometers from my place when you came about, you know.
It wasn't a few years ago. It was 9 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. It was 10 years ago when I first met Artisan. So
yeah, so 9 years ago, he came by. He did a presentation for our first incarnation of TADUG. I mean, it was very good to see you in person here. Yeah. I remember Chris, at the end of the presentation, bringing something to you that it was supposed to be called the DNN magazine. And I had a printout of what would be this potential DNN magazine. And that printout was the last thing that I have seen from that idea, you know. Anyway, so very good to have you here. And let me do a proper intro. So, Chris Hammond here. Let me see. I got your intro from DNN Summit. Let's see if this is accurate. And I have so many screens running around that. Okay, so here we go.
It's not as long as Mike's was last month.
Here you go. About Chris Hammond. Chris Hammond is the VP of Product Evangelism for Club Ready in Ellisville, Missouri. He has spent 15 plus years working with open source projects in the ASP.NET ecosystem, primarily DNN. Chris is a published author and has been a frequent presenter at many conferences, user groups, and companies around the world. Chris provides many ASP.NET and .NET Nuke DNN tutorials through his blog at chrishammond.com. He is also an active DNN community member, providing support in the DNN forums and all over the place. That's really it. Thank you very much. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Anderson. Great to be back.
Awesome. So I'm gonna let you go here. You know, gonna get your thing going on. Installing DNN on Azure is too hard. You shouldn't do it. The title of the session is wrong. Let me prove it. Let him prove it. So let me flick here to you, Chris. I'm gonna make you presenter.
All right.
And it should
let's see if I can get the right one. All righty.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
See the slide deck there. Perfect.
Yes.
So thank you, Anderson, for the welcome. As I said, or as Anderson said, the topic tonight is installing DNN on Windows Azure. Azure is too hard. You shouldn't do it. And I'm going to hopefully prove myself wrong there as we go through the process. As with any live demo, I could prove myself right, and it might completely bomb as we go through the process today. So just a quick overview of kind of everything I'm going to cover. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. So who, as Anderson said, I'm Chris Hammond. You can find me on Twitter at ChrisTalk. You can find me at christalk.com or chrishammond.com. I've been part of the DNN community since the early days, since before it was .NET Nuke or DNN. Originally kind of became part of the core team, a trustee, an employee of DNN Corp, left that, became an MVP, and have always been a user of the platform. And I know DNN, that's what I do. I might not use it on my day job anymore, but still highly motivated and involved with everything within the platform. So what? I'm going to walk you through today kind of how to install DNN using Windows Azure. When? Right now. Where? Azure. Why? Because that's what the topic is. And then how. So this is my last slide. I'm not much of a slide guy, so I'll just kind of go over some of the bullet points here, what we're actually going to do as we go through the process. So we're going to get serious here. We're going to get into Windows Azure. I'm going to show you how to create our app and our database. And then we'll go through how to configure that and get DNN uploaded into the site, configure the connection strings, go through the installation process, set up your custom domain, and actually install the platform itself. So let's go ahead and jump out of PowerPoint here. I'll come back to that. Jump out of PowerPoint and right over into our environment here in Azure. So in Windows Azure today, or Microsoft Azure, I already have my account set up and running. I have a large number of things that are already configured and running there in Azure. But what I'm going to do is really just come in here and I'm going to create a new resource. So I'm going to go to the All Resources tab in Azure and click on Add. Now, from here, we have a marketplace where we can go ahead and filter and look for things that we can install or set up in Azure. And if we would like, we can actually type DNN platform and utilize that and create a site or a web app based off of that. That's not what I'm doing here today. I'm not going to walk you through that process. I haven't used this particular install in quite a while. Part of the reason for that is, at least in my experience in the past, it was not easy to upgrade the install after you did it using this tool. That might have changed, but in the past it was kind of extremely difficult to do. So I'm going to step back here and go back to that new screen. And this time, instead of just typing DNN, oh, it's not doing what I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to filter here. Why? Let's do that. So I'm going to click on See All, and then I'm going to go ahead and type web app here. Now, in the IntelliSense or the auto suggest here at the bottom, there's an option called web app plus SQL or SQL. This is the easiest way to go, and this is what I'm going to show you today. If you choose web app, you can set up a web app. You can go then create a database using SQL. But if you do it all together with web app plus SQL, it makes it a little bit easier here as we go through the process.
So Chris, these are resource combos. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. So when you go to choose the DNN platform, it kind of is. It's a web app with DNN already installed. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm creating a web application that'll run in Azure, and it will create a database server and a database for me that will also run in Azure. So it's kind of just bringing ultimately 3 steps into one, or into one process. Because I need a web app, I need a database server where the database is going to exist, and I need the database on it. Choosing this option, web app plus SQL, just makes it easier.
Got it.
I hadn't used this until 2 nights ago because I'd always done it the other way. And then I saw this and I'm like, wait a minute, that makes it even easier. So we'll go ahead and choose web app plus SQL. We get some information over on the right side of the screen. I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down and click on create, and that will go to the next screen, which is the next blade in Azure, which is going to allow us to go ahead and configure our application. So the first thing we're going to do is give our app a name. Now, when you do that, by default, what it's going to do is it's going to create an app, a web app, and in this case, it's going to create it at whatever I give it for a name, .azurewebsites.net. In the world of Azure, you do have to make sure that that app name is unique because it's using that azurewebsites.net. If I were to type, let's just assume, try chris.azurewebsites.net, it tells me it's not available. It's not because I have an app with that name, it's because someone else does. But what I'm doing is, I'm creating an app here for an existing domain that I already have that's not being used. So I'm just going to go ahead and give the app name the name of the website. So the name of the website or the name of the domain is autocross.co. So for me, I like to give it the app name of autocross.co. Just makes it easy for me to decipher. Now I might do an underscore. Well, no, I wouldn't, because it wouldn't allow me to do that. But just a little bit of separation. A dash would probably work in there as separation for the name versus the domain extension. So we're going to give it a name. Now, ultimately, I'm going to set up a custom domain, a URL that will work for this. But on the initial creation, it's going to use autocross.co.azurewebsites.net. Now, the next part of this is we need to go ahead and attach it to a subscription. So if you have an Azure subscription already, and if you don't, you can go get one. You can get a free $200 initial trial that you can set up and utilize from Azure. I already have kind of two running. One of them came from somewhere. I honestly don't know where it came from, but it came from an MSDN subscription I'm attached to. That one gives me $50 a month. And then I have a Microsoft Partner Network, which I think gives me either $100 or $200 a month as well. When I signed up for the partner network and paid an annual fee of some sort. Anything that falls outside of whatever monthly credits I get just goes and gets charged to a credit card I have on file with Azure. So just for demo purposes, I'm going to choose the Visual Studio Professional subscription that I have on my account. Now I can go ahead and attach this web app and this SQL environment to an existing resource group, or I can create a new one. And see, by default, it goes to create a new one. So we'll just leave it as that.
Quick question, Chris.
Yes, sir.
On your credit card, did you have any surprise so far with, because I've heard of people saying, oh, I let this go, and then all of a sudden I had this big bill.
I wouldn't say there was a surprise, but it was definitely, it's easy to consume more resources than you need in Azure. So I want to say right now with all of my hobby sites, I have way too many of those. I'm pushing $150, $200 a month. And I think I have a $100 a month credit plus that $150, $200 a month. Now, I am outside of the norm in terms of I have way too many projects and websites and things running in Azure.
A domain junkie.
I am a domain junkie. I'm a hoarder. But they're not hoarding for selling. They're all hoarding because I had an idea at one point in time I was going to do something with them. So, but you can, there's very good documentation in Azure. You can go in and see what the costs are. You can see a prediction of what your cost is going to be as well.
Just to wrap up this point, do we have a way to cap? I mean, if you reach certain point here, you don't go any further than that?
You can, yes. So there is a way in your subscription to allow it to go past a limit or to cap it off as well.
Got it.
Yep. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, we've got some options here that we can go into the app service plan. We can control the location. So if I go ahead and click on that, allows us to come in here and determine where that's going to be. If you have one already running, you can choose that. If you don't, you can create a new app service plan. That's actually where your costs come from. So if I click on create new here, let's just call it Autocross service plan or Autocross SP. I do like to name my things in Azure, kind of relating to what they are. In this case, it's the service plan. So service plan, I'll call it autocross.sp. That allows me to visually say, okay, what is this? If it's just service plan 9EC409F6, as it is on the other one, I don't know what that is. So I've got to dive into it and try to figure out what's in there, what websites are running on it. But in this case, I can choose to give the app service plan a name. I can choose the location, which environment in Azure is this application going to exist. It's defaulting for me into the central US. If I wanted to host it in South Central or anywhere else around the world, I can choose a different location. And then pricing tier. So if I click on that, it'll take us to a new blade, which will give us some information, and we can go through and configure our different pricing tiers. So we've got a dev and a test environment here at the top. We have production, and we have isolated. The further to the right you go, the more expensive things get in Azure. Typically, that's what you're going to find. So in production, under this S1 pricing tier, which is what it started with by default, it estimates that that's going to run $44 a month. So that's just for the web application. Assuming that web application was running full CPU 100% of the time for the month, that's what the estimated costs are going to be. We can increase the resources if we want more CPU, if we want more memory, different levels. So you can see from S1, we can go up to 148 a month. We can go to 297 a month.
Chris, can you scale that up? I guess you can, but just want to make sure. Afterwards?
You absolutely can.
Okay.
You absolutely can change that later. You can also go backwards. So for today's purposes, because I want to ensure that everything runs smoothly, I'm actually going to choose this P1 V2 option. And then afterwards, I can go scale that back and make sure everything's running. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that option, choose apply, and then go ahead and click OK, and that'll create the new app service plan. That is now selected here under our web application settings. And now we've got the ability to go in and configure our database. So we'll click on the SQL database option. That brings up our database blade. From there, I can go ahead and create a new database. Again, I try to give everything a name that makes sense so I can see what it is later on. I'm going to go ahead and give the name autocross DB for database. I can then choose a database server. If I don't have one already, I can go through the process of creating one. You can see that shows up over here. So we'll call this one Autocross SQL. And we'll go ahead and give it a username and a password. See if that one works. That one did. And that will create our database server, in this case called Autocross SQL. Going to create a database inside of that server called Autocross DB. And here we can choose the pricing tier.
Chris, sorry for interrupting you, but that SQL that you're creating there, that's an Azure SQL, correct?
It is. It is an Azure SQL. So you can connect to it remotely with SSMS. Let me go ahead and close my pop-up here. You can connect to it remotely with Azure with SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. If you are migrating from an existing DNN website in a different hosted environment, you can create the database here, and then there's an Azure SQL migration tool, which will connect between the two environments. It essentially runs through and it will map out the schema. It checks to see if there's any issues with the schema from the DNN database to the Azure DNN database to see if there's anything that needs to be changed. I have run across a few things where you have to change a SQL store procedure, but that's always been because of older modules that have existed for 12 or 13 years now, that they run fine in SQL Server 2008 or 2012 or even 14 or 16 locally, but in Azure they need a minor tweak. The tweaks have been less than a line type of a change, nothing too major. From here, we can go ahead and choose our pricing option, what we actually want to spend on the database. Let me go ahead and minimize that window, because with the standard option with the database, you get to choose DTUs. Now there's a description here of what a DTU is. I'm not going to go ahead and click on that, but if you think of it, it's essentially data processing units. So it's CPU usage for the database. It starts out with a usage of 10, which is going to be an estimated cost of $15 a month. And that's a database up to 250 gigabytes in size. I can increase that. I can go from 10 to 20, it goes to $30. If I go 20 to 50, it goes to $75. I don't believe I have any DNN sites or database servers running greater than 20 right now. And the ones that I have at 20 are running multiple databases within them, not just a single database and a database server together. So just for simplicity today, I'm going to go ahead and choose 20, click on apply. That will set up our pricing tier for this database. Go ahead and click on select here. And that has now configured the SQL database, at least from an Azure perspective. Once we go ahead and click on create, it will go through the process of creating the server, creating the database, and creating the web application, which we're going to then have to try to connect to here in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and let that run. It's validating. Azure will go off and kind of work through that process. Up in the top right corner, I get a deployment and process notification. If I mouse over the notifications up there, I can start to see those things up here. So deployment's still in progress. So while I'm waiting for that to finish, one thing I didn't do in terms of prep work for today is I didn't make sure that I have the latest version of DNN available to me so that I can go ahead and install it. So I'm going to go grab the latest install file for DNN platform. So I'm grabbing that from GitHub on the DNN software page, the DNN.platform repo. From there, I'll just choose the install zip, and let's go ahead and just throw that into my local F drive. So I've got the copy of DNN. We're still waiting for the deployment to complete. So while I'm waiting for that, I'll go through some of the steps that I go through whenever I install DNN. And I always install DNN manually. I never use additional tooling. There are plenty of tools available. If you'd like to use them for installing DNN, I just like having control. So let me go ahead and get over to wherever my window went. I was trying to open a new folder explorer here. So within this, I have my DNN platform zip file. I always come in and extract the contents of the zip file first. Depending on your CPU, it might take a minute or two. In this case, it shouldn't take too long as we go through that process, but extracting the install package will create a file with the DNN file or folder, with the DNN files in it. So once that's completed, that's what we're going to end up using to deploy or upload the files to Windows Azure. And we're going to use a tool with FileZilla and FTP tool in order to be able to do that. If we switch back over here to Azure now, we can see in the notifications window, the deployment has succeeded. So if we go ahead and click on that, what that should do, that's the deployment, it looks like, for the database and the results of the database. So it created the website, Autocross CO, it created the SQL Server along with some firewall rules, it created the database, and this is just kind of the deployment results from that. So once that has completed, I tend to always start at the Resources tab on the left. You don't have to, you can actually pin things to your dashboard in Azure. I really don't do much with the dashboard. There's a lot of tooling there that's available to you though. But within all resources, I now have all of my various things listed here. And if you have a lot, a 42 is honestly not that much. You should see our Azure instance in our production environment at work. But you can go in and you can filter by name. So if I just type in the word autocross, it now filters down to the resources. So first resource here is the app service. Second one is the service plan. Third one is the server itself, and then the database for that. We don't have to touch any of the others except for the app service to go forward with what we're about to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the app service, Autocross CO. What that'll end up doing is loading up the blade with the overview tab here for our service. Now, on the overview tab in the top right, there is kind of a menu across the top there. There's a Get Publish Profile option. Now, this is not something you would typically do in a public environment, but I'm going to wipe this whole thing once we're done with our session today. But I can download the publish profile, and that comes as an XML document that's published, or actually it might be JSON, but it has an extension of publish settings. If I go ahead and click on that after downloading the file, for me, because of the way I have things set up on my machine, it opens up by default with Visual Studio Code. Now that's because I've opened up publish settings files in the past. I tend to immediately go in, click on view and choose word wrap just so that I can see everything here. And it is XML. So what we have here is a whole lot of information, but it's key information that's going to allow us to configure our database, our connection string, and FTP all our files up to our site. So let's start with FTP because that's going to take a few moments to actually upload. That's one pain point that I experience with Azure is the transferring of files, either during an install or even an upgrade from my local environment to the production environment into Azure. I always use FTP. It can take a little bit of time to do. It hasn't been a big enough of a deal for me to try to find a better solution to speed it up. The only time it would really, to me personally, be an issue would be potential downtime during an upgrade process. There may be ways to get it into Azure and migrate files over in a faster approach, but for now, I'm just going to show you how I deal with it today. So I use a tool called FileZilla. It's a desktop FTP application. It is free. You can go ahead and download that. Mine opened in the wrong window. What I'm going to go over here and do is in my FTP application, I need to know my host name, I need to know a username, and I need to know a password in order to connect to Azure. Well, let's see if I can make these multiple windows work here. In the publish settings that we downloaded, all of that information is available to us.
So,
there's other
Chris,
information.
I'm going to
There's
stop.
other information too, but that's what we need. So go ahead, Anderson. Sorry.
Sorry about that. But so to have FTP access, just because you said that you're going to create a web app with SQL there, that has already taken care of doing the FTP part of things as well.
It has, and it used to be when you set up the web app, you then had to go in and you had to configure a user and you had to configure a password for FTP, and there were other settings and things you had to do, and that all just happens out of the box now. Now the key is you have to know where to get the information, and all that information is in this publish settings file. So this is a key file. You don't want to share this file. You never want to put that into your GitHub repo because it has usernames and passwords for our site. And down kind of towards the bottom here, there's a publish profile node. Let me see if I can kind of break it up a little bit just to make, there we go. Whoop, that's going to be way too big. If I break it up, you can see there's a section here for publish profile. Profile name, autocross CO FTP, publish method. So out of the box, I've got a publish URL. That's the host line that I want to put into FileZilla. Not the very next one, but just shortly after that, we have username. So the username is autocrossco /$autocrossco. And then a password. Now, this password was not a password that I typed in during the creation process, right? Azure created this for me. This is the password. If I go ahead and paste that into the password option, I can now click Quick Connect. Now it gives me an option here, an alert here that's pulling in a certificate, an SSL certificate. I can essentially tell FileZilla, hey, I trust this certificate. Don't worry about it going forward. And it then puts me into my remote site. So there's a site here in the www root folder, and there's a hosting start file that is included there. So when you create a new web app in Azure, without choosing DNN or without choosing, let's say, Umbraco or Orchard as one of the install options, it just creates an HTML file that now sits out there. I'm going to go ahead and just delete it. I don't care about that file. I'm not even going to mess with it. I'm installing DNN. So now I'm going to go ahead and upload or get the FTP process started so that we don't have to hopefully sit around and wait for that too long. So what I have to do is on my local device, I need to go find the installation files that I extracted. I'm going to select all of those files and I'm going to go ahead and upload them. Now I am uploading those files into the www root folder. So it's going to go through that process of doing an upload. You can see here, it's going to upload, it looks like 2,650 or 60 some odd files. So that's going to take a moment. We'll let that run in the background here and have a little bit more discussion around the publish settings option. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code and I go back to my publish settings, inside of here, we also have our SQL Server database connection information. So we can see there's a SQL Server DB connection string. The data source is TCP autocross SQL.database.windows.net, port 1433. Has the default database name, the user ID, and the password. Now that is the password I typed in for the database user when I created that during the process in Azure. So that information is available to me. We're going to need that when we go through the DNN installation process. But before we actually install DNN, I want to make a couple other changes in order to kind of get things running in Azure. I have an alert over here. I don't know why. For some reason, FileZilla is trying to override an existing file. I'll go ahead and just hit OK. Always use that action if it's newer, just to keep that running. So that's going to fire off and run in the background. So let's switch back now to Azure. So we're waiting for our files to upload. That's going to take a few minutes to complete. While we're doing that, I want to talk about how we can use custom domains here in Azure. So if I wanted to, I could access this website at autocrossco.azurewebsites.net. I deleted that hosting the HTML file, so there's really not going to be anything there until all of the installation files upload for DNN. So we're just going to ignore that part for now. But within Azure, under the app service, we have a custom domains option. Now from custom domains, this allows us to go in and create or add a domain to our application. So if we come in here, we can come into the custom host names. You can see what the IP address ultimately is going to be for us right now. It's defined as 52.165.168.40. That's not something I can configure or change. I can force this to be HTTPS only. If you want to talk about HTTPS, come to my session at DNN Summit next month in Denver, and I'll talk more about that. That's a whole other topic than what we're covering today. But really what we need to do is go into the add host name option. So in this case, I'm going to click on add host name, and I'm going to type in the domain name autocross.co, and I'm going to click validate. Now what Azure is going to go do is it's going to go out and look at the DNS records for that domain, and it's going to look specifically to say, hey, have you configured this domain for Windows Azure? And I haven't done anything with that domain. It's sitting on a parked page. So if we go ahead and scroll down here on the screen, it kind of gives you some details about what you need. The first thing it says, there should be an A record that maps your domain to the IP address. Now, the IP address is this 52.165.168.40. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that because I'm going to need that here in a minute. Also, if we go ahead and scroll down, it tells us, hey, the host name's available, meaning it's not already configured in Azure somewhere. If I was using this on a different Azure website, it would not allow me to try it again. But then it says, hey, the domain ownership options are not configured. What it tells us is these are the options that we need to go ahead and configure in our DNS for our domain name in order to get it pointed to Windows Azure. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is bring over, and we'll see if I'm still logged in, my GoDaddy screen here, where I already have the autocross.co domain loaded. If I go ahead and scroll down, and actually, let me just go ahead and show you what happens. If I try to go to autocross.co right now, it ends up with this GoDaddy parked page because I don't have anything set up and running yet. If I come into the domain manager in GoDaddy, I can manage DNS. And what I'm able to do now is configure the DNS records. So to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the A record. So if we go back over here to Azure real quick, the A record needs to be a type A, host is the @ symbol, and then the IP address is 52.165.168.40. So in my DNS in GoDaddy, I'm going to change it to that. So I'm going to say the host record is an @ points to that IP address. Make sure I don't have any extra spaces or tabs in there for now. Go ahead and click on save, and that will save that particular record. Now, Azure also had another one there. It wants us to have a text type record, also with a value of a host value of @ and then the value being autocrossco.azurewebsites.net. So switch back over. Now, in this case, GoDaddy doesn't have a text record defined for me. So I'm going to click on add. I'm going to choose a type, in this case, text. The host is @ and the value is autocrossco.azurewebsites.net. Now from there, I can go ahead and actually, I'm going to leave the C name for www because I'm going to change that here in a minute. We'll talk about that. And I don't know if I can actually get rid of this guy or not. Let's see if I can delete. Apparently I can't. So, there's the delete option. So I'm going to delete this other record. It was just something residual from GoDaddy. So I've now changed the A record, pointed it to the IP address, and I've set up the text record. That's the two things that Azure says I need to do. So if I switch back over here to Azure again, and I click on validate, and there goes my dog. Hopefully she's going to lay down for a while. If I click on validate again, you can see now my hostname availability is green checked, and my domain ownership is also green checked. So by creating those records, I've now basically gotten Azure to say, hey, we can use this domain name. You've proved that you own it. So from here, I click add host name. Now, I have just added the host name autocross CO. I have not done anything with www.autocross.co. So if I want to do that, I'm going to go ahead and back up to the top here, type www in front of that. Wait a minute. Why did that work? That apparently worked. I was expecting to have to do something similar, but it came back in and said that was available. My guess is because I left the C name with www pointing to the @ symbol, my guess is that was the step that I was going to have to do. So because it was already there, it's still available. So I can just click on add, and that will add the additional host name there to my custom host names for this particular web app. So we can see if I close that extra blade that was open, I now have both www and the non-www version available to me. Now from there, I can also purchase a domain. Sorry, guys. I can also purchase a domain from Azure if I want to do that. But my dog's going to join me as we try to finish our session here. But I'm not. I use GoDaddy or other hosting or domain process purchasing services, so I don't need to worry about that within Azure. So let's go ahead, and we have the domain set up now. Let's switch back over here to FileZilla. You can see we're probably about 2/3 of the way done. So we got another 900 files to go, and we just kind of have to wait for that process now in order to complete the installation.
Let me ask you a side question, Chris.
Sure.
As you are a domain, junkie, what is your domain registrar of choice? Is that GoDaddy?
It actually. Excuse me. Lay down. Lay down. No. Sit. See how trained my dog is. Lay down. She's not very trained. So yeah, it is GoDaddy. I've always just used GoDaddy. I have so many domains with them. It actually saves me money to pay them $100 a year for the domain club. It saves me
What is that?
Well, it's $80 or $100 a year, and I don't even know what the discount is. It's probably $3 or $4 or $5 a domain every year is cheaper.
Got it.
Fees are cheaper, so it's an upfront cost, but overall it saves me. I think I have one domain that's registered with Google domains, and it was because I want to say Google released the app domain extension probably sometime in 2018, and I was like, let's go buy. I think I bought autocross.app and one other one, and I just wanted to kind of test things out with Google, so I used them for that process. But everything else is with GoDaddy.
I've been having some good savings. I'm switching from 1&1 to another provider called Namebright. Again, I've been switching all my domains when they come up for renewal. I just move them over. It saves me per domain maybe $5-6 or something like that.
Yeah. There's really, especially if you get into big levels of domains, it can be costly. For me, my domains are a tax write-off every year. I have like 20 versions of my name, 5 or 6 versions of my kids' names each, and my wife, and it's a problem. But I do enough side consulting and whatnot that I need the tax write-off.
But do you need therapy for that?
What's that?
Do you need therapy for that addiction?
No. I accept that it's a problem. It's okay.
First step is knowing you have one.
It is. All right, so this is just about complete. Just looking at my notes here, make sure I didn't skip anything else. Really, it's now just a matter of waiting for the FTP process to go. While we're waiting on that, let's go ahead and switch into Azure, and I'll talk just kind of a little bit about what's in there. So we're on the overview tab right now of the app service. From there, we can see there's the URL. In this case, it's always going to point to that particular URL, not the custom domain. We can click from our app service plan to check out our pricing. We can see what subscription it's part of. From there, there are some basic application settings. I tend to not play with those too much. We don't need to make any changes out of the box for DNN to run. If we needed to, if we wanted to choose a different .NET Framework version, one thing I might change is just turn PHP off. Excuse me, I don't do PHP. There's no need to support it. So you could turn that off. You could change the platform from 32-bit to 64. If you are doing things like using SignalR and you want to use WebSockets, you could turn that on. So essentially what we're doing here is we're just changing things that you would typically find within IIS as IIS settings. Let's see. Other than that, we do get into connection strings, but we're not going to mess with connection strings until we get into the actual installation process for DNN.
Chris,
now, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, while we wait there for the files to finish, let me ask you a question. I just wrote that down. At this point in time, is there, from your perspective, is there any reason why you would not go with Azure and would go with a traditional hosting company? Any reason to do that?
I think it depends on your technical level. Azure does kind of, it can be easy in what we're doing. If you follow these steps, you're going to be able to get it up and running, no problem. But with a hosting company like Manage.com or anyone else, they provide a level of service, right, that you may not want to do yourself, or you may not be capable of doing yourself. I've always been a very hands-on guy. I still have some things hosted with Applied Eye. They've always been great for me. Really, my move to Azure was just because I wanted to try it. I wanted to have Azure in my toolbox of things I know how to work with. And it's worked out well. It's also very easy to scale up. I mean, I don't have to worry about, well, is my web server still running Windows 2008, or is it 12, or is it a newer version? Like with Azure, I can go add resources. I can see what those resources cost me very easily. So.
You mentioned there, Chris, when you follow the steps, if you follow the steps,
yep.
And again, overall, do you have a resource that you go after those steps? I mean, is there just a Google search that you do and you hope to find the steps?
Not yet, but I will commit that I'll blog on this here in the next couple of weeks as we get up either before or right after the DNN Summit, because I'm doing this presentation there as well. I haven't blogged about DNN in depth in quite a while, but that's one of my goals for 2019 is to get started with that again. So
thank you.
So I did get a notification there. The FTP process completed. So let's just go ahead and switch back over here. And I'm going to go back to my browser, and all I'm doing is hitting refresh on the domain autocross.co that was loaded. Now it's going to take a sec because we've changed the DNS. The DNS is now pointing from GoDaddy's parked page, pointing to the Azure web app. Now, a web app is just that. It's an application. So the first time it is hit, the application has to compile all the code for DNN and load everything up. So it's going to take a sec just to get that initial load. Now, once that's complete, what we would expect to see, fingers crossed, is the installation screen for DNN, your standard out-of-the-box installation.
I'm going to ask you a question, Chris. So far, you haven't messed around with any sort of permission in the folder or anything like that. I mean, is that because the initial process took care of that? Is that because you're going to do that later? I mean, what is that? What is the deal?
It's already taken care of. I don't have to. So the permissions for the web application are completely sufficient for what DNN needs. That as soon as it fires up here, we'll be able to do everything. Now, we are going to have to change the way the connection works during the installation process, but that's standard, something you would have to do whenever you install DNN. no matter if you were, whenever you install DNN, assuming you're not using SQL Express, which is what DNN tries to use out of the box, right? So we're presented with the installation screen here. I'm going to go ahead and type in my password that I'm going to create for my, of course I didn't type it in right, for my host account or my super user account. Let's make sure they both match. Some reason they don't. One more time. There we go. So now they both match. I can go ahead and give it an email address. This isn't actually hooked up to anything. I don't have MX records on this domain. SMTP is not set up right now, so it's not going to SMTP. It's not going to actually email anything. Go ahead and give the website a name, choose a template, and then I need to go into my database option. So to connect to the database, I need to choose the custom option, and I need to go ahead and choose the SQL Server option because we are connecting to a specific SQL Server. So in order to do that, what we're going to end up doing is we need the server name. Let me see if I can bribe my dog here. I apologize. My wife had to take off with the kids and the dog wasn't happy upstairs. So let me see if I can bribe her to lay down.
Chris, as long as you don't do like that reporter from the UK, you know, I don't know if you recall, but a few months ago, he was kicking his kids. The kids were coming from behind and he was kicking the kids.
Yeah, no, I won't kick her. She'd probably bite back now. All right, so we need to provide the server name for our database server. We need to provide the database name. Well, where are we going to find that? We're going to find that in our publish settings. We've already seen that. We talked about it a little bit earlier. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, switch back to my publish settings. And from there, for my data source, that is my server name. So I can go ahead and copy that information, switch back over here, paste that into the server name, and then I need to give it the database name. Now the database name was Autocross DB because I like to give everything a name that kind of makes sense. From there, we have our object qualifier. Now this is an old holdover of the DNN days, early DNN days. I never use object qualifier, so I'm not going to put anything in there. If I did, what it would end up doing is putting this string, whatever I choose, in front of all of the database objects, tables, store procedures that get created. Now, from a security perspective, I need to connect to this database with a SQL Server username and password, as opposed to a Windows account using the integrated option. That information also is available in my, whatever this was called, publish settings file. So I have an ID, autocross DBA at autocrosssql.database.windows.net. That's the username. And then I had the password, which was just password1 exclamation. So anyone wants to go ahead and connect to my database server, do it quick. In the next 30 minutes, it'll be gone. So from there, I always choose to uncheck my send anonymous information to DNN. There's enough information floating around on the web, so I don't need to send any more back. So I'll go ahead and click on continue. What that's going to go ahead and do is it's going to go and attempt to do my installation of the platform. So it's going to step through the process. We'll see how far it makes before it hangs up. I did have it hang up the other day, but it ended up completing. It just looked like it wasn't actually finishing. But that's just kind of DNN and resources. And that's part of the reason when I chose my my service plan option, I chose the P1 V2 or whatever that option was, as opposed to S1, just to try to give it a little more oomph as it goes through this installation process. The installation process does take a little bit of time as it goes through and creates a database, installs all the scripts, and extracts modules and all the other things that need to be installed within the platform to make it successful.
Guys, that's the perfect timing if any one of you online have a question. I mean, if anything comes to mind, that's the perfect timing to shoot that to Chris.
All right. So if anyone wants to type any in, go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and kind of chat away a little bit more about what I'm doing here within Azure. So back into Azure, as we're just waiting for that process. Back to the applications blade, or the screen here that I was on. Under application settings, we have default documents. So these are just general IIS default documents. We can control what's going to be out there. For DNN, I remove everything except for default.aspx. You just don't need anything else there. For me personally, from a security perspective, I just like to keep it plain, clean, and simple. If you've seen in the past where environments may be compromised and files uploaded, oftentimes, at least in the past, it used to be that they would upload a file that would end up being an index document. They wouldn't actually hack DNN, they wouldn't replace anything, but if they got into IIS, they could put in a different default document and kind of keep people from being able to access the root to the website. So so we can go in. I'm not going to change those right now, just because of the installation that's occurring, and it does appear to be stuck. Checking my console here. At least it isn't moving through the 18%. We'll let it run for a few minutes and confirm that it actually does complete. So from there, one of the things I didn't do during the installation process, there was an option for application insights. Application insights is really some analytics tooling that's available within Azure. It's super useful. In terms of my use of it within DNN, I haven't had a whole lot of time trying to make it work. One thing I will say is I'm not sure that it works without actually compiling some resources and references into the project itself in order to make it useful. In our custom application that we have at the office, it's built into that application, provides really good insight if there's exceptions, handling problems, super useful to be able to kind of report and query on various aspects of the site. It'll tell you resource time, how long people are on pages, what they're using, etc. One of the other things that I want to mention that I think is extremely cool within Azure is the database management. So within Azure, if I switch back over here to the Autocross DB now, the database in Azure is backed up automatically and restorable. I want to say it's restorable for 7 days or 7 days history, but it's restorable. You can restore that database. Now, what I've experienced, and this was a few months ago, I haven't tried it recently. When I tried to restore a database, so I'm trying to think what the scenario was. I'd been working on a site and I royally screwed something up. I don't remember exactly what it was. But what I ended up having to do was to restore a previous version of the database and then point DNN to that database version. What at the time, when I went through that process to actually restore, it did not restore over the existing database. It created a new database that it restored to. So for example, mine is Autocross DB right now. If I were to do a restore, it would create a new database, Autocross DB, let's say version 2 or date or whatever. I think you get the option to name it. So that's something to keep in mind. It's actually kind of useful to be able to do that. But when you do that, you then have to go change your connection strings. You need to point DNN to the new database. And from a resource perspective, you need to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep the old database around or are you going to remove it? If you keep it around, you're going to get charged for it. Even if it isn't being utilized, if it's running and it's on, you can get charged for it. So that's something to keep in mind. But with Azure, you don't have to do anything you don't have to schedule database backups. It just does them for you.
Nice. Awesome. Chris, there's someone that has a question. Warren, if you have voice available there for you, I would say that it would be better if you ask the question directly. Are you able to activate your voice, Warren?
So that he doesn't. So I'll go ahead and read the question and hopefully see if I can get it right. So is an Azure install close enough to an on-site install that an Azure install could be used as a staging environment for an on-site production environment? I'm trying to convince a client to move to Azure. Could it be? Absolutely. But as with pretty much all things DNN, DNN itself is not a great publishing platform from staging to production. But if you're just treating it as an installed website and you're not expecting to be able to migrate from stage to production, you absolutely can use it as such. I guess the only real differences would be, or things you'd have to worry about would be what happens with the if you have database scripts that work in Azure but don't work locally. Is that a good QA environment? I would argue that your QA environment should really be exactly what production is. That being said, you can set up a VM in Azure and run Windows Server on a VM to mimic your production environment. But I feel like when you're doing that, when you go to that level of work, and to be honest, our environment and work runs on VMs, you're almost using Azure in terms of, it's a little overkill to run a VM in Azure and manage IIS normally like you would if you were just in a regular hosting environment. Oftentimes you can get more, you can get a better value from a host running the same or somewhat equivalent hardware than you could in Azure. It would cost you more to run a VM of equivalent specs typically in Azure. Now, what's the benefit of Azure? You don't have to wait on someone else to upgrade those specs. If you want to add resources, you don't have to submit a change form and someone has to go and order the part. I mean, depending on how you're doing it, you don't have to wait on a third-party resource. When we were hosting, our production environment used to be hosted with Verizon's Terramark down in Miami. Anytime we wanted to make a change, it took a week to get a new server set up. Now we can set up a server in an hour. And we could do it even faster than that if we took some additional effort to essentially clone and set up an environment that we could clone and easily reproduce in Azure. So hopefully, Warren, that helps a little bit in terms of the question there. Okay, so he said, yeah, thanks. We'll go ahead and switch back over here, and we can see now it's 100% done. Now, it took like 7 minutes, but it did complete. So if we go ahead and click on visit the website, again, the site has to recompile because we've now installed a bunch of new code, new modules, but once it's recompiled, we should get a fresh, clean install of DNN 9.2.2 here that'll be running and accessible to us. Now, once that occurs, that's it. We're installed. We have a version of DNN that we can now run. We can make changes to, we can add our content, we can upload modules. Now, there's always a risk that you run into a module that may or may not support Azure, and really it's not Azure that typically is the issue. It would be the database restrictions on the Azure SQL. I haven't run across those other than my migration from old installs to an Azure environment. But it is something that in a true production world, you would test. You would have an environment in Azure that you use as your QA environment. You install the modules, make sure they work before they go into your production environment. So we've got a DNN site here. We can log in, we can make changes to it if we need to. I'm not going to jump into DNN itself. I do want to talk about, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but I do want to talk about upgrades because we now have 9.2.2 installed. Next month, hopefully 9.3 will come out, and I want to do an upgrade. So what is the process? Well, for me, the upgrade process is you always back up the website and the database. First thing you do is you back up the website and the database. So how do you do that in Azure? In Azure, you don't have to back up the database. We switch back. Let's go back over to the Azure database here. If I come in, you can see I've got the restore option there. If I choose restore, what it does is it gives me an option to say, are you choosing a point in time? Or are you choosing long-term backup retention? It's going to give it a name. You can see right here, it automatically assigns a new name. So when I restore it, it's going to try to choose that name. And then you get to choose a restore point. Well, we've been running for what, all of less than an hour. So I'm not sure actually what we've got available to us in terms of restore points, but I guess there's the oldest one, which was UTC 15 minutes after the hour. So it's probably what, I guess 35 minutes ago, and there was nothing in it at that point. So if I restored, I'd essentially be wiping everything out. But as it goes through the process and does backups on its own, it would that information would be available to us. So from an upgrade perspective, I don't need to back it up. It's all the database. I don't need to back up. It's already backed up. I know, dog. You want some more food? From there, I do need to back up the file system. Okay. For me, the way I back up the file system, again, this is another slow process. I do that. Oh, hold on. I just lost my window. I do that with FileZilla, with my FTP tool. So I go in and I connect to my website. And for me, I go into, let's just say I'm going to do it on the root of my F drive here. I would create a new folder, call it back just for simplicity's sake. I would then within Azure or within FTP, download all of the files from my installation. Now, it's going to take another couple of minutes or a little while to do that. So we're not going to complete this process and go through an upgrade today, but that's the first thing I have to do. Back up the files. Once you back up the files, then I essentially do the upgrade, which is take the upgrade or the upgrade package for DNN and upload those files via FTP. Now, what I would tend to do there is disable my website in some form. Now, I could disable it using the app offline file, or I could disable it by turning it off in Azure. I mean, there's a couple different options about how you would go about preventing people from hitting the website while you're going through the upgrade process. So upgrades are simple. They can take a little bit of time just in terms of the file transfer. So something I'll try to look at in the next couple of weeks before DNN Summit in Denver is I'll see if there's a better way to do the file transfer so you don't have to necessarily wait for things to go back and forth via FTP. You can see right now it's downloading files and the queue is actually still going up because we uploaded at least 2,000 files. So I guarantee you we're going to download more than that as we go through the process to do the upgrade.
Chris, does Azure have a ability to allow you to generate a zip file at that site, like at the www root, or not?
I didn't quite hear you because I was coughing. I'm sorry, Paul.
No, that's all right. Does Azure have the ability to do create a zip file at the root? You know, in the
I haven't seen one, but I've got to believe there's a way to do it somehow.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was one of the services or one of the things you could do with off the your root there.
So there is an option here for backups. So I'm back on the app service, and if I choose the backups option, it looks like I can configure kind of snapshots. Let's go ahead and just take a look here. So it looks like in order to do the backup, you're probably going to have to set up a storage account.
Yeah. Okay. So I understand what. Yeah. Okay. You need to have a little bit more resources, and once you have that resources, you can then take advantage of those capabilities. Because if you had set up the resource, you could then just kick off a backup. You would have that sitting in your resource, just as you have a backup sitting for your database, and then at least you know you've got a restore point. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
But like anything else, pay the piper.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure you've got something. I did get burned when I first moved sites over. Fortunately, I still had the sites on the old hosting, so I could do the migration again. Because I did something wrong in the upgrade, and it was not a recoverable screw up. Mm-hmm. So. Okay. So that's going. You can see now it's up over 3,400 files. So after the extraction and everything, it's going to take a little bit to do that. But so the backup would definitely be a great option. Now, that being said, you definitely got to make sure the backups are running. Never trust that the automated backup is there. Always check before you go through that process and try to do your upgrades.
Yeah, well, it looks like you can do a snapshot, which is You can probably do I want to back up now.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah.
My dog is needy tonight. I apologize, guys. Let me switch back the one more slide here. So, kind of what's next? Obviously, we're talking about backups. That's absolutely something to. I'll be doing some more research in best practices around how to do it in Azure. DNN Summit is coming up in, I guess, just over a month and a half in Denver. Any of you guys going to be able to make it this year? No, come on, Paul.
I want this time. I want this time. I will not
Yeah,
be there. But
I get it. It's hard. So I'll be there. I'm presenting this topic. I'll also be presenting on Cloudflare, which is a web application firewall caching solution. Provides a lot of great tools that you can use, free and paid versions. So check that out. I talk about how you can use that within DNN. Excuse me. Then I also talk about SSL options. I know Addison in the user group meeting last week, you guys talked about Let's Encrypt. Go into some details there on how to use Let's Encrypt in Azure to automatically renew that 90-day SSL certificate that other than the Azure resources necessary to kind of do the automation, is completely free. So you can get SSL up and running on your website pretty easily going through that process, and I'll document that from a DNN perspective and talk about that in my sessions in Denver. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would love to go.
Awesome. Chris, are you wrapping up?
I am. I think that's kind of everything I've got today. So if there's any questions, anything you guys want to go through, please feel free to fire away.
Yeah. So Chris, again, this was awesome. I mean, anytime. Well, I have a question there. Do the summit sessions get recorded and can be purchased after all?
You know, I'm not sure. They've done some recording in the past.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the plan is for this year.
Yeah, I don't think that they have anything planned out in terms of recording. The recordings that were done for DNN Connect in Europe, they were very, very well done. But I haven't heard of anything about DNN Summit to get sessions recorded. So I don't think that they will be recorded. I don't think so.
Yeah. Sort of like the blackout rule in football.
Yeah.
You want to, right? You want to see it? You got to go.
Yes.
Another question here from Steve. I've been using DNN for less. How do I know if moving to Azure is a good idea? I don't know. That's a hard one to say, really. Azure, I'll admit, Azure can be a little expensive. That being said, with good hosting can be expensive as well. So, really, I would say if you're curious in moving, you might, if you've got a problem like me where you have multiple domains, then pick a project and try to move that, and give it a month or two and see how it works. See if performance is up to speed. If not, you can always add performance in Azure. So getting more performance is not a problem. It's how much can you get for the same amount of dollar with what you're currently spending, and then how much effort do you need to spend to maintain it, if any. I don't do anything with my Azure environments other than if I need to do an upgrade. Like I don't have to go in and make changes or do Windows updates or anything. It's all just done for me. So you might have that in your hosting, you might not.
Steve, if I may add to that, I mean, DNN for Less being a sponsor, you should not leave them, okay? You should keep your account in good standing over there for at least as long as they are a sponsor of the user group, you know.
Yeah, I think Addison, I guess I've been very happy with DNN for Less, and I'm thinking, you know, it looks like more money, and it's like the technical support has been excellent. I'm sort of curious about Azure for this and other type of applications, and I could see experimenting with it just from a learning perspective. But it's, you know, from a practical, you know, I've got some clients that I have to keep happy and things are working just fine. It seems almost a little bit overkill, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and it might, if you've got a host that works, you're happy with the cost, you're happy with the service, then it might not make sense to move. For me, like I said, it was me trying to learn put additional tools in my toolbox, because I think there's absolute value from a career perspective in knowing how to use the platform.
I think, frankly, this is one of the areas that it's worth paying that little extra premium for, just from the training point of view and exposure to the different environment, and just to the cloud solution type scenario where it's all handled in the background for you. I mean, that really does help. There is a sort of future-proofing yourself from that point of view. Said the guy who's about to retire.
Too young to retire, Paul. You got to get another 15, 20 years in you.
Yeah. Well,
I can see, for instance, if you're wanting to do experiments where you want to try out this, you want to try out that, the fact that you can create servers so easily, that's a real plus. So I can see it, sort of as for a test bed. I'm kind of curious about this feature or that feature, or just trying out different things that I'll probably trash after I learn how to do them. But from a production point of view, I guess it really would depend on, like, my sites are all relatively low traffic, and the type of service I get works out pretty good.
Awesome. So I guess that the point is, if you are able to experiment with a site,
Yep.
Why not? I mean, I think it's a great strategy.
And it was. I'm not sure if it still is. I think I set up an account for a buddy of mine who we had a forum website. We wanted to move it over. So back in November, I think we set it up, maybe end of October, and it was like a $200 credit for signing up. So you had 30 days to essentially play with it and see. It was a fairly large database server that we were utilizing, so it took a little bit of resources to make sure things were running, and we were running just over, I want to say $220 a month once we get that up and running smoothly. But if you don't have anything large, you can do a lot with that $200 in that 30 days.
Awesome. Chris, again, thank you so much. It's so good to have a step-by-step like this, and now, whenever I have the need to put something in Azure, I'm going to follow step by step of what you did there. Again, I really appreciate you sharing that openly, Chris.
Yep, I appreciate you guys having me today. I apologize for the dog. Of course, she's now laying down. She's done.
She's tired.
Uh-oh.
She's coming back. Again, Chris, thank you very much for doing this, and looking forward to your other sessions. And, after the summit, those other topics, they would make a great conversation here. Again, leave it for, in a few months, we can talk again about the other topics, okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much on behalf of the entire group here. I know that everybody got a lot of value out of the presentation.
Great, man. Thank you guys for having me again.
As always, Chris, thank you.
Okay, so we have already asked the questions. Let me see if there's anything else there. Okay, thanks from Warren. Okay, for this, I went from totally new to DNN to a site. Okay, great. Warren. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so questions were done already. We have crickets here. We are right on time. It's 8:04. My clock here at 8:03. Anything else? Anything else from the group? Any other questions, comments, announcements, things like that? Or can we depart in peace here? I'll give you 1, I'll give you 2, I'll give you 3. Let's go in peace here. Oh, let me just do a quick announcement here about our next meetup. Let me see if I can find this. So far we have Andrew Hoffling. He will be talking about, and again, I have so many screens here that I cannot read. Okay. He'll be talking about DNN Keymaster, which is something, a kind of module that he's coming up and putting together that will allow you to store, as far as I understood, that will allow you to store the confidential information that you usually store in a plain format on the web config, that will allow that to be stored on Azure. Guess what? Azure again. I don't know if it's an Azure service or if it's something that Microsoft is calling Azure XYZ. So again, I'm not sure about that, but it's promising to be a good one. That's in a month, and that's exactly on February the 6th, on same time, same day of the week. Thank you very much, guys. I didn't wish you a happy new year. I should have done that at the beginning, but I remembered that. So happy new year to everybody. Have a great 2019, and we meet again in a month. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. Chris, again, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for doing this, and I hope that you have a great DNN Summit.
I will. Thank you, guys.
Okay, guys, talk to you. I'll send you guys a reminder when we get close to the next one. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.